So in the world of watch collecting, there are these watches that are right there at the entry-level position in terms of price and just delivering value, that they become these gateway drugs into future purchases down the road. But when you get into that watch for the first time, I think a lot of people are ultimately thinking about, okay, I've had some fun with this watch. What's the next step? Or a watch that's similar and it's in the same alignment of the things I like. What is the next best thing in a price range that's above that I should look at? Now for this video, how this is gonna work, we're gonna have about 7 or so entry-level models that I would say are very well regarded, well known in the industry, and are common gateways for people that are getting into watches. And then using that as a basis, we'll have a corresponding watch that will match a lot of the characteristics and will define those characteristics, or at least the things that I think people are drawn to when looking at that model, and then find a parallel for a model that's going to be a little bit more expensive or that next tier. This is all relative when you're talking about what is the next jump up, and this is all subjective. So what I'm gonna try to do is define why I think people are drawn to each one of these models. Now to begin here, we have the Seiko SKX, probably one of the most beloved dive watches from the attainable perspective. But before we get into this video, I definitely recommend checking out our recent write-up on the Seiko SKX in 2022, just kind of a general overview, things to consider, and where does this watch kind of stack up now in 2022 compared to years prior. I'll have a link to that down below. So looking at the Seiko SKX, just kind of persona or characteristics and why you would go for a watch like that. This is somebody that values the ISO compliance or just getting a proper dive watch. They want ruggedness, they want a wearable case. Legibility and lume are also important, and great water resistance. But I think the number one factors here when looking at this watch that I want to lead into, and when thinking about kind of that next tier for someone that be into this watch, but also kind of looking at higher price range, I think the best thing is actually to look within Seiko's collection, looking at what I would call this new Seiko dive watch with this SPB143 collection and all the different case variants, or say like the SPB239. Now these are models that were recently unveiled in the last 18 months or so, and I find are some of the most wearable cases and quickly remind me of the SKX in many ways. They're very similar in their lug-to-lug dimension. They wear much smaller than what their case size might indicate. This diameter though is even less broad than that of the SKX. I just see a lot of heritage and just similarities in many of the factors that are leading the charge here, but also getting a sense of kind of more the higher end spectrum of Seiko dive watches. Here you're getting a 6R35 movement on the inside, a wide variety of dial colors and cases to choose from. This SPB239 that we have featured here is kind of this more gilt marking version. It does not come on a bracelet, which is one of the downsides of this version, but if you want to go for a bracelet version, I would definitely check out like the SPB143, the 145. There's different models in this family that certainly are good ones to check out, and I find that the bracelets, although Seiko is not known for their bracelets, as you'll really see with the SKX, this one is actually quite good, or at least solid, all things considered for Seiko standards. Now next up here, we have basically the equivalent to the SKX in many ways from the dress category from Japan, and that's the Orient Bambino. So what are the characteristics of the Bambino? What do people like? I think its elegance on a budget is kind of the really core of why people like the Bambino. It's traditional in many of its designs, understated, and ultimately I think it's just a king of value, which is going to be hard to really replicate at a more expensive price. But let's look at those other characteristics. Elegance on a just relative budget, it's traditional, understated, and with that being the case, I'd look at a watch that kind of walks that line, has contemporary components and upside, while also kind of remaining true to this heritage type of design. And for that, I have the Mido Barncelli heritage as a great representation of that here. So when most people think of Mido, they're not thinking of their dress watches, at least I would imagine that. If they are thinking of anything dress oriented, maybe they're thinking of some type of more dressy multi-fort type of design. But usually not going to be the Barncelli. This is a model that's usually neglected by many enthusiasts, as well as the brand themselves. It doesn't seem like to be a focus for them, but I think this is a very attractive, well put together piece for the price range. You're getting close to the $1,000 range, but you have a wide variety of options to choose from. Inside, you have an ETA 2892. Most of their movements are going to be those modified ETA-based calibers that are going to utilize that reduced beat frequency to extend that power reserve. You're not getting that here, but the ETA 2892 is a very refined movement. It's going to help the thickness of the presentation of the case here. And I think it just works well with this design. You're getting this like fine grained texture on the dial surface that looks great underneath the macro lens. It's just a straightforward, kind of no nonsense type of dress watch that believe it or not, I don't think a lot of brands are really looking at. They either do this very overly elegant type of design that is so to the past, or they just kind of make this thing that's a kind of abomination, way too big, not keeping in mind what a dress watch should be. I think this is a nice middle ground, and I think that's what the Bambino is. Outside of just the crazy budget, I think this one falls in alignment with that type of idea. Now for this next watch in the budget category, we have the Timex Marlin. And specifically, I want to look at the hand-winding version. Let's look at some of the characteristics. It's retro in its design, 1960s era without a doubt. Minimalist, very compact sizing, old school profile in size, and especially with the crystal, you kind of get that old school acrylic type of design. It's that just mid 20th century design watch for the dress type of perspective while valuing minimalist principles. And with that, I don't think there's a perfect comparison. I was thinking about, let's look at the Geo 60s dress watches, but to go from a Timex up to a $6,000 dress watch seemed like a stretch. That's not really the next tier. So I'm looking at something around $1,000. And I think for that, I wanted to look at the Junghans Maxbill automatic. Now there are several different Junghans Maxbill automatics that you can choose from. The one that I wanted to go for here is the traditional linear markings on the dial, so no numerals. They're really not the same match when you use the numerals to that of the Arabics that are used by the Timex Marlin. So I think the simple printed markings that you're gonna find with this version are just gonna be more appropriate. But why I think it's a nice kind of middle ground is you're getting that mid 20th century design, maybe a little bit more designed to the Bauhaus principles, but still I think comes together to have a lot of similarities to what is presented with the Timex Marlin. Also here you have that convex type of dial design that kind of tapers back at the dial outskirts. Also with the Timex Marlin and with the Maxbill, you're getting some similarities with the dome crystal, both of them being acrylic. You can get a sapphire crystal with the Junghans Maxbills. There are some new variations that offer this, so if that's a concern for you, that is available, and it does kind of mirror the same type of dome profile. They did a nice job without kind of sacrificing that vintage hue that comes with these acrylic crystals that are so much a part of this era in design. All right, so now for this next one, I struggled because I knew I needed to include this watch on this list, but I was struggling to figure out what is the most appropriate next tier up for this watch. And I'm sure people can make many different stances on this, but the watch I'm talking about is the Vosstok Amphibia. So what are the characteristics of Vosstok? Why do people like the Amphibia so much? The military roots with the Soviet Navy, the novel engineering of the case back and how that works and creating that seal and that water resistance, the enthusiast play and just feeling very genuine in what it's trying to go for and just not trying to be what it's not. And also the fact that it's not for everybody. It's polarizing as can be. I think that's almost a characteristic why people that are on the positive end for Vosstok and the Amphibia like it so much. Now with those characteristics, I find that there's some overlap here with the Bulova mill ships. And hear me out, this is what I'm kind of thinking. Reasoning mostly just because of the case back design of the mill ships. It reminds me greatly of that of the Amphibia. It has a similar profile, that really highly domed crystal, similar to that of the Vosstok Amphibia and those kind of acrylic crystals on the front. They just have this crazy bubbled look. Also, it's going to come from a very similar era. This was based on a prototype from the mid 20th century, and really that's where the Amphibia started to rise as commercial dive watching also rose during that era. Similar dimensions on the lug to lug, the lug profile, depending on what case size you're going, or case style you're going for the Vosstok. I think a lot of the dimensions are met the same way, 200 meters of water resistance, and a no-nonsense movement on the inside, which is kind of a downside when you're talking about this version here of the Bulova mill ships, because it is positioned in a price range that I don't think it makes a lot of sense to have a Miyota 8 Series movement inside. But nevertheless, if you're talking about similarities to the Vosstok Amphibia that it's hard to replicate, I mean, I still think it is going to kind of fall with some elements that are going to make them similar. For our next watch in the budget category, we have the Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical, perhaps the definitive field watch for $500. Not probably, it is the definitive field watch for $500. But now looking at the characteristics of the Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical, just to give us a baseline. Heritage design, leading factor in what this is offering. Legibility, no nonsense field watch. The field watch DNA, in essence, is exactly that. That's really what it is, down to business. And then also a brand with military pedigree to go along with it. So you probably could look at a couple different places when talking about that next tier. You could look at some offerings from like Flieger watch style brands, maybe not so much like a field watch. I think maybe some aviation themes or just some elements that are shared You could look at something like Laco or Stova, but I want to go up to kind of another tier. I think this is a better stretch for what I would say characteristics that somebody would value in a Hamilton khaki field would also find in something like this, and that is going with the Longines Spirit. So I remember looking around at when these were first unveiled, some of the reactions were, oh, I'll just get a Hamilton khaki field, which I think is a total miscalculation on what is being provided with this watch. This is definitely a significant step up from what the Hamilton khaki field is providing, which again, is a great package for $500, but this is around $2,000, and I think you're getting some great things to go along with it. 100 meters of water resistance, so that is a great upgrade compared to the mechanical option. Of course, if you're going for the automatic, not as much of a big deal. 40 millimeter case, you're also getting some titanium options if you do want to pay a little bit more. Wearability is going to be very similar to that of the Hamilton khaki field, kind of a longer lug to lug dimension, but still relatively wearable for a wide variety of wrists. Sapphire crystal, but also a COSC certified movement on the inside, a movement that's going to be made in combination with ETA. That's going to be a proprietary movement for Longines. Extended power reserve on this, despite not dropping the beat frequency down to 21,600 vibrations per hour, so you kind of get that nice middle ground. I always like this 3.5 hertz beat rate just because it kind of walks that middle ground of still looking like the sweep of a 4 hertz movement. And then also factoring in another element to this, the legibility, no nonsense aviation style theme, although maybe not as close to that field watch theme that's going with the Hamilton khaki field, I think still is in relative alignment. And also when you're talking about brands with real pedigree when it comes to military issued timepieces, Longines certainly needs to be there as well. For our next watch, we have the Tissot PRX. Now, why would somebody look at the PRX? What are the characteristics? You get the integrated bracelet design, scratching that itch of those high-end steel sports watches. You have retro elements inside of the case and just the finish and presentation. The case and finish is really class leading for the price. Sporty yet refined enough to never really look out of place. I think that helps define what the PRX is going for. And with that being the case, I think the next tier, there's a couple that I'm considering. There's more of an offering now than there ever has been when it comes to this integrated sports look, because the demand has never been this high ever in the past. But I still think, despite the new offerings, that the Maurice Lacroix Icon is kind of that next tier up if you're trying to get into this design. A lot of the characteristics that you like with the PRX are also there as you get a little bit higher. Now, of all the things going for the Maurice Lacroix Icon, you do have to admit that I would say it's more in the homage territory than even the PRX is. So that is one thing to note. You know what it's going for when this thing was designed. But a couple things that I think are really nice about this, even outside of those characteristics, multiple case sizes to choose from. You have a 39 millimeter option as well as a 42 millimeter option. In addition though, a lot of the same elements that are really leading with the PRX are also here. Really solid bracelet, steel sports design, maybe not as retro in its presentation, but still a little bit of that kind of being seated within. Of course, really paying a lot of tribute to those high-end horology steel sports watches, no question about it. It's sporty yet refined. I think that's certainly going to apply here with the Maurice Lacroix Icon as well. And I would say if you're like this style for around $2,000 and you do like just kind of being more on the nose, this is going to be the one to look for kind of for that next tier up from the PRX. And now for our final watch on this list, we have the Casio A16. So what are the characteristics of this watch? You have a digital watch, of course. I think that's one of the obvious points. Iconic. I think you could argue that this is iconic and kind of being a trailblazer in adopting this design and becoming beloved by so many enthusiasts. If you see this, you know that's a Casio. Useful, legible, and also just, again, influential with what it was able to create. Now, going to that next tier. We're talking about influence, we're talking about a digital watch first, good legibility. I think for there, I want to look at the Hamilton PSR. So when people saw this watch the first time, I think people were writing it off a little bit too quickly. Even, honestly, myself. I saw this kind of as an overly expensive digital watch. And I think, sure, that's, warranted, and there's some truth to that. Is it maybe priced a little bit high? Perhaps, but I think people are overlooking what this watch originally was. If you look back in the history of the 1970s, the original Hamilton Pulsar, which then the name was then moved over to Seiko, one of the most influential watches ever created. And I try not to be overly emphatic in saying that, but it is the truth. That watch sold like crazy. It was a digital watch that was seen as a luxury good. It was worn on James Bond's wrist. And this is kind of that modern recreation of that design. You have that single button. It looks futuristic, looks straight out of 2001: A Space Odyssey. it looks the part 100% of the way. And also the finishing of the case. I know it might not be something that you're thinking about when you look at a digital watch, you're not thinking about case finish, but the bracelet is well done. The finishing, even on the side of the sapphire, how it's reflective and how vivid and visible the display is once you do engage that pusher on the side to brighten up the screen. It is well executed. Now, this is certainly not gonna be a watch for everybody. There are gonna be people that absolutely detest this and that it's almost the antithesis of what the Casio is providing with just value for dollar, no nonsense digital watch. But I think there are some carryovers that make this an appropriate kind of next level up if you do like the digital oriented nature of these kind of entry-level Casios and wanna look for something that's a little bit higher that matches that just feel and look. But all right, guys, that is my video here today looking at these entry-level watches, kind of these really well-known entry-level watches, and what is that next tier up? What can you get if you want those same characteristics? If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. That's also a great indication because I think you could probably do another one of these in the future. So if you did enjoy this, would love to recommend that. We can also probably do this for different ranges as well. So definitely open to it, but want to see what you guys think of this style and content. Also, definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of over 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support. Also offer a full factory warranty for all the products we offer. In addition, we also have a great pre-owned section on our site, have different luxury products available from a wide variety of brands. And if you are actually trying to sell your watch, you can also fill out the form, upload some pictures of your watch, fill out a questionnaire on the site, and one of my colleagues will be in touch with you if it's a good fit for our program. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I'll see you all very soon.